Good morning. Our study this morning is in the 17th chapter of Jeremiah, the 15th verse. Jeremiah 17:15. I assume there are some who are joining us by live streaming, and our logistics here this morning are a little different. Every other pew is cordoned off. My pew is cordoned off, so I have to be in a different pew. We certainly welcome everybody to the Bible class. Those of you who are with us by live streaming, you can ask questions all you want, but I won't answer them. So this small audience reminds me of the guy that called the theater during the Depression and said, "What time's the feature movie?" And the owner said, "Well, what time can you come?" We are, I guess, in that kind of a mode this morning. But we're glad to be here. Read in the paper this morning where there's 247 persons have been diagnosed with this coronavirus, and 11 million people. That so far is not too bad. So we're going to take every precaution we possibly can. We'll be having services tonight by way of live streaming. So we're in business as usual to the extent that we can be.
Hey Bill, as one of the elders, I would just like to ask that you guys keep this building open because I'll lose my mind if I can't come here on Sunday mornings.
You lose your money.
I need to come here. Come on.
Pardon me?
Yes, what did you say?
Oh, I thought did you say mind or money?
Mind. I'll lose my mind.
Oh, I'm sorry. Nikki will lose her mind. Money, and we'll lose your money. The church will lose your money, and you'll lose your mind. Well, that.
I want you all to keep this open on Sunday morning.
Okay. All right, the 17th chapter of Jeremiah, the 15th verse. I was reminded with this pandemic, or whatever you might call it, I was reminded of a verse we studied not long ago in the 14th chapter of Jeremiah, beginning with the 12th verse. And, Jeremiah, for the 10th, 15th, 20th time, is talking about them being he said in verse 12, "When they fast, I will not hear them, or hear their, and when they offer burnt offerings and an oblation, I will not accept them, but I will consume them by the sword, and by the famine, and by the pestilence." Now, we have a pestilence there, disease. We have a pestilence, and we are in a panic about that pestilence, and I suppose rightly so. But think of the nation of Israel when they were being punished. Not only the disease, not only the pestilence, but what else? The sword and famine. Now think about that. If we were confronted by not only the pestilence, the pandemic, but if we were confronted by a foreign nation coming in, assaulting the nation, and not only that, no wheat in the Midwest, so to speak, or no corn in the Midwest, no food. Now we would really be in a world of hurt if we were in that sort of a situation. So we're not in too bad a shape compared to what the nation of Israel was in when they were when God had decided that enough was enough, and that he punished them. Now, in the as we think about it, let me give a little context here. Some haven't been in our studies here recently, being in other classes and so forth. A little context here. Well, was Jeremiah the only prophet that was operating at that point in time? Well, obviously not. And Wednesday evening, Habakkuk, is that how you pronounce it? Something like that, was kind of contemporary with Jeremiah. Who else was contemporary with Jeremiah? Ezekiel. Now, there were several assaults on Jerusalem, and before Jerusalem was destroyed, there were a couple of times when the Babylonians came in and took away captives, took away part of the temple wealth. And then Ezekiel, among the 10,000 captives mentioned in the 24th chapter of 2 Kings, he was among those. And what did, in the first 24 chapters of Ezekiel, what does he talk about? What's his message? Remember, he was carried away into Babylonian captivity. The temple had not been destroyed. The walls of Jerusalem had not been destroyed at that point. And what was his message in the first part of Ezekiel? His message was Jerusalem going to be destroyed. Temple is going to be taken away. Well, I wonder why he presented that message to the captives. They were already in Babylonian captivity. They were already in a world of hurt. But they probably didn't believe that Jerusalem was going to be destroyed, that the temple was going to be destroyed, you see. So Ezekiel was contemporary with Jeremiah. There were other prophets. In fact, Ezekiel mentions that there were other prophets.
Daniel would have been in that category.
Yeah, I forgot about Daniel. But now, whereas Ezekiel was out among the folks, out in the hitherlands, out in no man's land, so to speak, Daniel was with the leadership. He was with Nebuchadnezzar. He ended up being a powerful person in the regime of Nebuchadnezzar. And so we had all this interfacing of prophets. God has sent a lot of people, a lot of messengers to the Jewish people, and they didn't respond. There may have been 25, 30, 40, 50, 100 people, prophets, working with the Jewish people at that time, and we only have a mention of a few, and then of course, Jeremiah left a message.
In Jeremiah 26, there's a prophet who's killed. His name's Uriah, and he prophesied against Jerusalem. He tried to escape to Egypt, but the king of Judah sent after him and got him and killed him.
Yeah. So there was just the message of Jeremiah. There were other prophets contemporary with Jeremiah. And then if the Jews had had any sense, they'd have paid attention to what Isaiah had said 100 years earlier. The Jews really didn't have any excuse for not repenting. They had enough messages. They had sufficient messages from God to spawn their repentance. Well, let's look at then, beginning with the 15th verse of the 17th chapter of Jeremiah. Let's start with the 13th verse to get the context here. O Lord, all that forsake me, or thee, shall be ashamed, and they that depart from me shall be written in the earth, because they have forsaken the Lord, the fountain of living waters. That is, they've written in the earth. It's just a temporary writing. They're not in the book of life, so to speak. Verse 14, heal me, O Lord, and I will be healed. Save me, and I shall be saved, for thou art my praise. Now, Jeremiah, goes through this cycle of being inspired, being, on top of things, and being in depression, or being, saddened and despondent with regard to the treatment that he was getting from his fellow persons, his contemporaries. Then beginning in verse 15, behold, they say unto me, where is the word of the Lord? Let it come now. He was preaching that Babylon was going to come, that the nation was going to be destroyed, that the whole situation would be, the whole real estate of Jerusalem would be nothing but a barren wasteland. And their response to him is, behold, they say unto me, where is the word of the Lord? They're essentially saying, okay, Jeremiah, you're saying that we're going to be destroyed? At that point in time, no problem. And Jeremiah was, I think he was rather despondent about that. He was despondent about that attitude. It was just that they were mocking him and said, all right, preacher, you say this is the word of the Lord, but nothing, there's no destruction. There's no destruction that's imminent. In verse 16, as for me, I have not hastened from pastor to follow thee. Jeremiah says, I haven't hastened. I have been a faithful shepherd. I've been a faithful preacher. I've been a faithful prophet. That word pastor indicates that, some spiritual leadership position. As a pastor, I followed thee, neither have I desired the woeful day. Now, Jeremiah was preaching destruction. Was he happy about that? Obviously not. He wasn't happy that, in fact, the book of Lamentations is all about Jeremiah's despondency over the destruction of Jerusalem. He says, as for me, I have not hastened from being a pastor to follow thee, neither have I desired the woeful day. Thou knowest that which came out of my lips was right before thee. Jeremiah is, he's having this conversation with God and essentially saying, I've been doing what you've told me to do. I've been preaching, I've been teaching, I've been shepherding according to your will. And then he says, be not a terror unto me, thou art my hope in the day of evil. Now, I wonder why he's saying, be not a terror unto me, you're the hope, my hope. I think it was just a matter of, he was physically mistreated, he was thrown in prison, he was maligned, he was mocked, and he went through, these cycles of being depressed and then being inspired. He says, be not a terror unto me, God. Thou art my hope, because, you're the hope. You're that's all there is. Particularly day of evil. Verse 18, let them be confounded that persecute me. Now, let's think about this. Was Jeremiah being vindictive when he says, verse 18, let them be confounded that persecute me, but let not me be confounded. Let them be dismayed, but let not me be dismayed. Bring upon them the day of evil, and destroy them with double destruction. That is, massive destruction. Double down the destruction. Was he being vindictive? Was Jeremiah, telling God, they've persecuted me, they're against me, now get them?
It sounds a little bit like it does. It'd be hard not to, after all he went through. I feel that way a little bit.
Yeah, Kathy says that it would be hard not to kind of be vindictive. But do you suppose he really was being vindictive?
Perhaps he just wanted to get rid of the evilest people out of there, so that they can turn God back to God.
Get rid of the false prophets. Get rid of the evil people. Get rid of the mafia. Would that be something that we would think about? Get rid of the MS-13. Is that group from South America that does mafia kind of stuff here in America? Would we be vindictive in asking God to get rid of that kind of influence? I don't really think so. Just get rid of the evil. Get rid of the evil. Let the good people flourish. If the good people were being persecuted, and do you suppose there were some good people there in Jerusalem? There were, no doubt, good people, and Jeremiah is saying, get rid of these evil people.
Bill, the reason he's preaching to them is so that they'll repent.
Yeah.
But if they won't repent, then
Get rid of them.
let the enemies of God receive their reward.
Yeah. We've mentioned this 100 times, I'm sure, and it's well known among us that when those Ninevites repented at the preaching of Jonah, God preserved that group for what? A century. That's all they had to do is repent. But since they weren't repenting, then Jeremiah's message to God was, get rid of them. Get them out of my face. Get them out of Jerusalem. Annihilate them. Get rid of that evil influence. Let them be confounded that persecute me, but let not me be confounded. Let them be dismayed, but let not me be dismayed. Bring upon them the day of evil, and destroy them with double destruction. Now, verse 19, Jeremiah receives another bit of instruction. Thus saith the Lord unto me, go and stand in the gate of the children of the people, whereby the kings of Judah come in, and by the which they go out, and in all the gates of Jerusalem. Jerusalem has separate gates, and I think the instruction here is you go down to where the people are, where there's, business transactions, where there's conversation, where there's activity. you go down there and you give them the message that I'm going to give you. Thus saith the Lord, you go down to the gates of the children of the people, and say unto them, verse 20, hear ye the word of the Lord, ye kings of Judah, and all of Judah, not only the kings, not only the leaders, but everybody, and all the inhabitants of Jerusalem that enter in by these gates. Thus saith the Lord, take heed to yourself, and bear no burdens on the Sabbath day, nor bring it in by the gates of Jerusalem. Now, as we think about the history of the Jews, did the Jews have a problem with violating the Sabbath day instructions? Throughout the history of Judaism, did they have a problem? Did they often disobey that command? Obviously. They did it on a regular basis when they were in the wilderness. Did some of the people get in trouble for not obeying the Sabbath? In the business of the manna, they weren't to go out and to try to collect manna on the Sabbath day. They got double it up on Saturday or on the day before. Well, they always had a problem with that, and they wanted to do commercial activity on the Sabbath. They wanted to go to the beach. They wanted to go here and there on the Sabbath day, or wherever they went for entertainment or business. Now, he says, he emphasizes there, and neither carry forth a burden out of your houses on the Sabbath day, neither do any work, but hallow ye the Sabbath day, as I have commanded your fathers. Now, was that the only thing that the Jews were instructed to obey, the Sabbath day? No, there were other regulations. I wonder why he picks out the Sabbath day. I wonder why he hones in on the Sabbath day. They were breaking the Sabbath, and Jeremiah said, don't break the Sabbath. If they obeyed the Sabbath, what would that probably tell you about the rest of their character and behavior?
They were willing to listen to God and honor God.
Yeah. And that would have probably been an indication, if they'd obeyed the terms of the Sabbath, that would have probably been an indication that they were going to be, or if they obeyed the Sabbath, that would probably be their behavior would probably, in the other areas of life, would be probably consistent with what God said. That's probably the idea there. He said,
That's kind of what I think Jones looked at today too. Attendance. If you give people with faithful attendance, it's an indication that they're going to be faithful with other things too.
Yeah, that's a good point. And of course, in many cases, if not in most cases, when people are withdrawn from, it's because what? Now, if they're unfaithful in attendance, what's probably the next thing? You can be unfaithful in lots of other areas of life, behavior, and the various New Testament doctrines. So that's a good point. So he says in verse 23, but they obeyed not, neither inclined their ear, but made their neck stiff, that they might not hear, nor receive instruction. If my voice is coming in and out, it's because of the technology. I'm not doing anything different.
Every time you put your left arm on your jacket, it happens. I'm just saying, I don't know. That's what seems to be.
Okay, I'll try something different here. Very good. So they said, okay, we're not going to obey. They made their neck stiff. Are there any New Testament examples of stiff-necked people? Lots of examples there. They were stiff-necked. And they had a neck stiff. And it shall come to pass. Now, they said, you can imagine the conversation. Jeremiah's out there preaching, and you can imagine some of the conversation that took place between Jeremiah and the folks, Jeremiah and the leaders, where there would no doubt have been confrontations there. And the majority of the folks were saying, we're not going to receive that kind of instruction. And it shall come to pass, if you diligently hearken unto me, saith the Lord, to bring in no burden through the gates of this city on the Sabbath day, but hallow the Sabbath, to do no work therein. Then shall there enter into the gates of the city kings and princes, sitting upon the throne of David, riding in chariots and on horses, they and their princes and the men of Judah and the inhabitants of Jerusalem, and this city shall remain forever. What about that? If they had repented, kept the Sabbath, kept the law of Moses, would Jehoiachin be among the last kings of Judah? Would other people in the lineage of David have been kings? According to this, there would have been other kings. When did the kings stop in Judah? When did David's lineage of kingship stop in Judah? When they were carried away into captivity, right? Now think about this. Had they repented, would there have been more kings of Judah? Would Judah have continued? I don't know whether that's a broad. I don't know about. That's a good theological question, isn't it, Tim? Well, the implication here is they would have, that society, that racial group, that ethnic group, that religious group would have continued on. I mean, that's the implication here. But and even after all these warnings, if they had repented and gone back to the old paths, to the law of Moses, the destruction would have not taken place or would have been delayed. If there's anyone who disagrees with that, speak up. But it says here that if you just do this, then shall there enter into the gates the city of this city kings and princes, sitting on the throne of David. Continuing the kingship of David in a physical sense here, riding in chariots and on horses, and they that and their princes, and the men of Judah, and the inhabitants of Jerusalem, and the city shall remain. Now, forever there has the idea that as long as the social order is in accordance with God's laws. Verse 26, and they shall come from the cities of Judah, and from the places about Jerusalem, and from the land of Benjamin, and from the plain, and from the mountains, and from the south, bringing burnt offerings and sacrifices and meat offerings. Now, what does that imply? Jeremiah had said the temple is going to be destroyed. Jerusalem's going to be obliterated. But if they repent, then people are going to be coming from the north, the south, the east, and the west, from Benjamin, from all over. And what were they going to be doing? Bringing burnt offerings and sacrifices and meat offerings and incense, and bringing sacrifices of praise into the house of the Lord. The temple is going to remain if they would repent. But if you'll not hearken unto me to hallow the Sabbath day, and again, this hallowing the Sabbath day would just be an indication that in the rest of their lives they would be obeying the law of Moses, the Ten Commandments, honoring father and mother, not killing, not stealing, and so on, you see. But if you'll not hearken unto me, to hallow the Sabbath day, and not to bear a burden, or, violate the Sabbath day, even entering to the gates of Jerusalem. On the Sabbath day, what was the position of the gates of Jerusalem when they were obeying the Sabbath? They were closed. In fact, after they came back from Babylon, there were people disobeying the Sabbath, and there were merchants coming up to the gates, and what did the leader say? Essentially said, if you come again, bad things are going to happen to you. But if you're not hearkening to me, to hallow the Sabbath day, and not to bring a burden, even enter into the gates of Jerusalem on the Sabbath day, then will I kindle a fire in the gates thereof, and it shall devour the palaces of Jerusalem, and it shall not be quenched. Now, if the destruction destroys the palaces of Jerusalem, and the fire shall not be quenched, what does that mean? The palace is going to be destroyed, but everything else is going to be destroyed. If the White House is destroyed, and the Pentagons are destroyed, and God says it's just going to be a fire that rages, then it's all over, you see. That just kind of ends there with, here you are, Jerusalem, inhabitants of Jerusalem. You obey, or you're going to be destroyed, along with the environment, along with the city. So then, in chapter 18, Jeremiah gets another message from God. The word came to Jeremiah from the Lord, saying, now, no doubt this is just another segment here, another day, 2 weeks, another segment in the life of Jeremiah. He says, Lord said, you go down, arise, you go down to the potter's house. Now, go down, apparently the potter's house, the pottery industry, and I suppose there was a whole industry, it was probably in the valley of Hinnom, Jerusalem being on the hill. I suppose they had the potteries down there, and to get rid of the smoke from the city and so on. He says, you go down to the potter's house, and behold, he wrought or he worked on the wheels. Pottery. I don't know about pottery, but there's some wheels involved there. And the vessel that he made of this clay was marred in the hand of the potter. So he made it again, another vessel. And it seemed good to the potter to make it. Now, the person doing the pottery thing, if it doesn't turn out right, what's he do with the clay? Or what would she do with the clay? Start it over. He would have control over it. He would fashion it according to his vision of what it ought to be. Well, what's that have to do with anything? Well, then the word of the Lord came to me. Now God's going to explain it. O house of Israel, cannot I do with you as this potter? Saith the Lord. Behold, as the clay is in the potter's hand, so are ye in mine hand, O house of Israel. Now let's think about that for just one moment. Potter has control of the clay. God has control of this nation of people. Is that fair? To the atheist, would that be fair? To the humanist, would that be fair? To the non-believer, would that be fair?
Doesn't really matter if it's fair.
Right. But you see, the humanist would say, the atheist would say, well, what are some of the arguments that atheists, that non-believers use about God's actions with regard to, let's say, the people of Canaan? What are some of the atheists and the agnostics and the humanists say about God's allowing the children of Israel to destroy the Canaanites? What do they say?
He's horrible and cruel.
Yeah. What's their argument? God's a bully. But the message here is God is sovereign. God is the creator and the sustainer of the universe. And God is in control of nations. And God is particularly in control of the Jewish people. And if we don't accept the sovereignty of God, if we don't accept the fact that God is God, then we could maybe come to the conclusion that, well, that's not a very good deal. Here, these innocents being killed.
He's the Father. He's the Creator.
Yeah.
How many times do we say to our parents, that's not fair?
Yeah. So,
I hate you.
the point is here, God's saying to these Jews, you're going to have to accept me and accept my law and do what I say.
It's for their own good, anyway.
Yeah, it's for their own good. But if you don't, I'm the potter. And believers just have to accept that he's the potter.
And
there are consequences.
I mean, it's really very simple. These people make these arguments because they want to do what they want to do.
Yeah.
They want to argue against it.
O house of Israel, cannot I do with you as the potter? Saith the Lord, behold, as the clay is in the potter's hand, so are ye in mine hand, O house of Israel. And what instant I shall speak concerning a nation? At what moment shall I, at what moment shall I decide? At what instant I shall speak concerning a nation and concerning a kingdom to build it and to plant it? God formed the Assyrian nation, the Babylonian nation, and according to the prophet Daniel, Nebuchadnezzar's dream had to do with 4 different kingdoms. God prophesied that, and he made it happen. You see, created Babylon for a purpose. I guess we're finished. Time's up.